Hello and welcome to the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, where we discuss self-aware leadership with thinkers from around the globe. I'm your host, Nia Thomas. Join me as we talk to today's guest.
Today we have a truly remarkable guest joining us, Jacqueline Wales, known as Fearless to those who know her. Jacqueline's journey is one of resilience and growth. Overcoming self-doubt and fear, she's dedicated over 40 years to personal development, emerging as a trusted coach and advisor to academics, entrepreneurs, scientists, and corporate executives alike. Her candid, empathetic approach has earned her praise as an insightful guide who's unapologetically raw and real. Jacqueline's list of accomplishments is extensive. She has authored 3 books, including The Fearless Factor series and a novel, When the Crow Sings, creating transformative online programs and delivering a powerful TEDx talk on unleashing the power of fear. And there will be a link to that in the show notes so that you can go straight and watch that. She's a professionally trained singer. She's earned a black belt in Shotokan karate and embraced CrossFit at the age of 63. Yet her greatest achievement is her loving family spanning 4 children, 3 grandchildren, and 44 years of marriage. From her roots in Edinburgh to her global adventures across San Francisco, Los Angeles, Paris, Amsterdam, Bali, and beyond, Jacqueline's story is one of perseverance and triumph. So join us as we delve into the wisdom of Jacqueline Wales.
Well, that is a lovely introduction, Nia. Thank you so much.
It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome.
So, Jacqueline, tell us a bit about your journey. You've been around the globe, and you've had a very interesting journey to doing what you do now.
Well, if someone had said to the wee lassie in Edinburgh that this was where she was going to go, I would have been quite surprised. Although I had childhood dreams of traveling the world. I mean, I had a big map on my bedroom wall, and I had mapped out where all the places I was going to go to.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a working class girl from Leith, Scotland, and what did I know about anything? And in my family, working class family, there wasn't any expectations that you would do anything significant with your life. It was simply just show up and do the work. So that was the early start to my life. And as I mentioned in my TED talk, there was a lot of violence, alcoholism, and all of the dysfunctions that go with that. So the journey to become me was a fairly complicated one in many ways. And, I'm often asked, what was the driver for you to heal your own traumas? Because that's really what we're talking about here. And I say always, it's my children. It was up to me to clean my act up in order for my children to be in a better place. And that's not something that a lot of people take on, because it's hard work. The process of change and transformation of self really demands a lot of focus and attention. And after 18 years of working with people and many decades of going through my own processes, I can absolutely say to my clients, this stuff is hard, but if you're willing to do it, the rewards are beyond anything you could possibly conceive of. And that has truly been my life. And I look back on it now and I go, wow, how did you get from there to here? And of course, I know how I got from there to here. It was about constantly paying attention and being willing to dive into the gnarly, uncomfortable, very traumatic stuff that really defines you as an individual. But at the same time, redefining yourself becomes the key piece to it.
In your TED talk, you talk a little bit about ACEs, and for people who don't necessarily work in the early years sector and don't know what ACEs are like we do, ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. Those shaped you. How did they really help you uncover your awareness of life and people and relationships?
So when you think about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs as they're called, they determine the thinking and behavior that becomes the patterns of your life. In my case, there was a lot of drugs and alcohol. There was a lot of abusive stuff going on. I gave my first child up for adoption when I was 20 years old, and I walked out on my second one when he was 3.5 and left him with his father. So there was a tremendous amount of dysfunction, and I use that word because, and it's generally thrown around, but truly dysfunctional behavior. And that's at the root of ACE traumas. And so for me, it was about, how much more damage do I want to do? And it came to me, frankly, when I was 35, I got pregnant for the third time. And at that point, I'm living in San Francisco, and I have the relationship with my husband, as you mentioned in my bio, 44 years now. And I realized that I needed to do it differently, that there was 2 children in the world that I had left behind. And it was time for me to figure out my stuff so that this child would have a better start. So the traumas of early childhood really need to be addressed by looking at what are the behaviors that are serving you or not serving you. And that, I think, is really the key piece to that. And we all know that we can be our own worst enemy. No question about it. So how do you change that up? Well, I certainly didn't get there by doing it by myself. I'll say that right off the bat. I've had tremendous amount of support from therapists and coaches and teachers and various modalities, physical and mental and spiritual, over the years, that has helped me break through some of those really damning behaviors that not only damned my life, but damned my offspring if I wasn't going to clean it up.
Quite an amazing journey. I was reading some of the reviews of your book, The Fearless Factor, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the Fearless Factor. So it's the Fearless Factor at work, and also that will be in the show notes for people to go and have a look on Amazon too.
So I started the coaching business when I was 54 years old, and it came about because circumstances changed dramatically in my life, and suddenly I was faced with, you better figure out how to get a job. And what is that going to look like? And it was a coach who said to me, you've gone through so much in your life, and so much of it has been fear-based. Maybe you should write about fear, and maybe you should become a coach and, really coach people on that subject. So I started to think about that and realized that a lot of my life had been fear-driven. And as you know from my talk, fear, I believe, is imagination-based. It's the stories we tell ourselves. And it is what becomes our lives, frankly. So I decided that I would tell the story of my life, and I would tell people what I had learned about the journeys I have made, and that became the Fearless Factor. And I had invited, I think, 12 women at the time to come and share their stories of how they became fearless. And so between us, we put together very personal stories, but yet some wisdoms around what we were experiencing in order to be fearless. Because here's what I like to say about fearless. Being fearless is not the absence of fear, but the courage to take the next step. Fear and courage are 2 sides of the coin. And if you can flip the fear towards the courage side of things, and you take it 1 step at a time, then the fears that you dismantle are simply about changing the narrative of who you think you are.
When we're talking about fear, I assume that you have to know yourself pretty well to understand both what your fears are and the impact and the implications that that has on you. So where does self-awareness fit when we're talking about fear?
Analyzing and examining the stories. That's the self-awareness part right there. So I have an exercise in one of my programs. It's called Going Beyond Fear. And I say, take a blank piece of paper, put a bubble in the middle, and put the word fear in there. Now, start creating all kinds of different bubbles around that bubble about all the things you think you're afraid of, all the fears that you have about what might or might not happen in your life, or the ways in which you've limited yourself because of specific types of fear. I like to say that there are, I believe, six things that are really the fundamental to fear, maybe more, but fundamental to fear, number 1 actually, is I'm not good enough. That belief system that you're not good enough, you're not deserving, you're not worthy. These are 3 big ones right there. And I see that in my clients over and over again. Then you got the fear of loss, the fear of humiliation, the fear of rejection, the fear of failure, and the fear of success. So there's a whole lot of stuff, and I'm not talking about phobic fears here, like, spiders or snakes or whatever. We're talking about the mental constructs of what really creates fear in our minds. And again, it's a mind trip. It is not anything physical. Unless you have empirical evidence for fear, you're just making stuff up.
Interesting take on fear, because it becomes so physical and so visceral, doesn't it, when you are fearful of something? But you're right, in many cases, it is just the story we are telling ourselves. What is the Fearless Manifesto?
The Fearless Manifesto was made up of the ways in which I see fear operating in our life, and just simply that. So the Fearless Manifesto for me was, let's take a look at fear. Fear is our inability to trust we can handle whatever comes our way. That's one of the pieces that are in there. How do we develop our confidence? Fear is about taking that next step, as I said, to be more courageous. The point I was making with this is little aphorisms that you can think about in terms of fear. And it is important that, your self-awareness will not improve until you're ready to analyze the narrative of self. That's all self-awareness is. What is the narrative of self? And if the narrative of self is that you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you're not deserving, you can't create the life that you want to create, or there's other people in your life you want to blame because they're the ones who are holding you back, or there's circumstances in your life that are not optimal. And so that's, one of the ways in which we cannot move forward. We have to constantly examine what that is about. Now, the examination of our negative thinking, the examination of our behaviors, the examination of our fears is a lot of energy. It's a lot of energy. So, you think about how you communicate, for instance. Now, the internal dialogue that we have, a lot of us have going on, is that we're not very worthy, frankly. And we call ourselves names, and we get into blaming life and so forth. You could see yourself as a victim as a result of your childhood or your upbringing or your teachers or whatever the case may be, but that's a choice. And the other thing that I like to talk about is we're always in choice. The choice to accept, to reject, to change, to build something different than what you currently have. And I don't care what your circumstances are, you always are in choice. And when you say, I don't have a choice, you just made a choice.
Yeah, an interesting way of thinking. And I think people often don't realize that they have that choice, and sometimes they need a friendly other or a coach or a manager or somebody within their family to say, but you do have a choice.
Yeah.
You mentioned the narrative of self, and something I always ask guests on the show is, how do you define self-awareness? And I like that way of describing it. It's the narrative of self. And the third layer of my self-awareness definition is regulation of your behavior. And I think regulation of your narrative also fits that, because when you have that narrative, again, you are back to that position of choosing whether that narrative continues or whether you want it to change.
Yeah. I mean, if you go with the fundamental piece I keep talking about, which is that fear is the stories we tell ourselves. What is the story of you? I mean, I have a piece in my TED Talk, as you know, where my mother used to say, who do you think you are? Which was meant to keep me in my place. And many of us have heard that phrase in that way. But when you change the narrative of who do you think you are, that becomes a different conversation, because if you take away labels, you take away, the roles that we have and the ways in which we describe ourselves, to come down to that fundamental question of who are you is a very difficult question to answer, because most of us are living by expectations of people who raised us or people around us, of the ways in which we're supposed to live our lives. Now, I like to say most people live their lives very linear. They're vertically, I should say. You do a job and then you do the thing, and it's up and down a ladder kind of stuff. But I like to see my life as being horizontal because I absolutely have done a whole bunch of different things, and I've been blessed. I had the resources to be able to do that. So, it makes a difference right there. And it's easy for people to say, well, that stuff costs a lot of money to do. And I'm like, yeah, it does. But on a different level, you can easily do it yourself just by simply reading enough stuff, watching enough podcasts like this, or listening to good stuff, and really trying to change that narrative, which, as you said, is a regulation of thinking and behavior, because that is really what we're doing here. Do you want to be different? Yes. Okay. So if you want to be different, then be different. Don't keep repeating the same stuff over and over again and hoping for a different result. It's the definition of stupidity, isn't it?
How can people develop these mechanisms? I'm just thinking, we've talked a lot about fear, and I think when you're in a situation of fear, you're not ready to be able to accept that you are in control and you are able to make choices and you're able to make change. What can people do to move away from that fear into a more positive place?
Okay, so let's take, the fear of asking for what you want. That's a big one. I might not get it. They're going to turn me down. I'll get rejected. I'll be made to feel like I'm not worthy of asking for what I want. Well, until you try, until you actually open your mouth and do something, and this is specific to women, by the way, women don't speak up. When you're willing to challenge yourself, and yeah, your palms are sweaty, your stomach feels like it's about to throw up, you feel like somebody's going to come down with a hammer and ruin your life. Well, I have to tell you, that doesn't happen. You might be made to feel, or you will feel, that you are maybe not adequate for the task. But if you don't push yourself, if you don't take the risk, and here's what I like to say about risk. It's an acronym I made up called respect your intention and show courage. So the courage piece comes up again. Risk and vulnerability are part of life. Are we willing to be taking that risk that someone might not give us what we want, but until you learn how to ask for it, you're just going to sit there and go, well, nobody's giving me what I want. Yeah, well, have you asked? No, I haven't asked yet. Okay, great. So what would it look like if you were just to go, feeling damned uncomfortable about this, but I'm going to stick my neck out and see what happens. And I see that more and more in the workplace. When I work with my clients, I really challenge them. I'm known as unapologetically raw and real for a reason, which is you come to me and you tell me a story about what you think is going on. I'm going to challenge you to go the opposite way. And when they do, and they come back to me and they go, wow, I had no idea what the power was of that. And I go, uh-huh. So do more. Do more.
You sometimes really do need to have somebody lift the lid or open the curtains or help you uncover your blind spot so that you can understand your potential, your power, and your choices. And sometimes, we need to dip into somebody who's raw and real and ask them to show us that bit of light that helps us move forward.
Yeah, and sometimes we need the push, I mean, there's no question that having a good guide in your corner helps. I stopped using the term coach a long time ago because I think there are far too many bad coaches out there, frankly, who haven't had the life experience that is necessary to help guide people in the right direction. So a guide is far more of how I would see myself at this point. I help people navigate the challenges of showing up for themselves. That's really it.
And that's an interesting way of thinking about it. So, listeners and watchers, you probably know that my book is coming out and it's called the Self Awareness Superhighway, because self awareness is a journey. If you need a navigator, you know where to come.
Thank you very much.
Self awareness is the first module in your Transformational Strategies for Success program. Why does it come first?
The first module is actually called Going Beyond Fear. So the second one is called What Are You Willing to Change? These are the first two modules of transformational strategies for success. And it's 11 strategies altogether. But the first one, the going beyond fear piece, is really about you starting to challenge your thinking and behavior. That is self-awareness right there. So if I'm looking at this and going, well, there's a lot of bullshit stories going on here, then I'm willing to say, okay, I'm in this program for a reason. And that reason is I want to uncover what is my self-limiting beliefs? Where am I sabotaging my own behavior with my thinking? And of course, the emotional responses to that as well. And the brain stuff. I mean, our brain starts creating chemicals around the thought processes. And those chemicals, as you heard on my TED Talk also, are what's driving this thing of the alarm bells going off.
Yeah.
I'm under threat. So when we can remove that threat from our existence, knowing that, you're not that unique, by the way, which is another thing. I get people going, I got this problem and blah, blah, blah. I do group facilitation on my programs, and what they get, the biggest piece they get from that is, wow, I didn't know that everybody else was struggling with the same stuff. Because we keep it under wraps. We try to hide our insecurity. We hide our shame. We hide our distrust of others. We hide our feelings of inability or uncertainty. But when we start to reveal that to ourselves and to others, it disappears because it's no longer unique. And we spend so much of our life trying to protect ourselves. I talk about control in my work, and especially in the Fearless Factor at Work, which was written for mid-level managers, by the way, because I had seen the lack of self-awareness, lack of trust, and so forth. And so, when we're really ready to dive into the control issues, control is a way of saying I'm safe. Well, it's an illusion because you're not. But when we feel like we must have a hand in everything, then we have a hand in nothing because it's all about you, and the people around you suffer. I call myself a recovering control freak, but my kids would argue you're still a control freak. So there you go.
You mentioned there that you'd seen middle managers without self-awareness. How did that look when you said you were spotting it, you were observing it?
Lack of confidence, not taking decisions, avoiding, seeking approval, wanting to maintain status quo so that you do things by the book, you don't show up fully. Or the other side of it is that you get too aggressive and you want to control everything, and you're, very much about get the work done and, don't ask questions. Or if there's new ideas, you push against them. You don't admit to mistakes. There's all kinds of ways in which that behavior is running organizations. I do behavioral assessments, 360 behavioral assessments in my work. And those patterns are very predominant in leaders who are not constructive, who are not concerned about helping people to grow and develop. Because that's the other thing about managers. They'll tell you, I don't have time. I give my feedback and it's usually negative focused, as opposed to taking the time to get to know someone, get to know what's really challenging for them, and ask them how you can help. That becomes a bigger conversation than just get the work done.
Yeah. You mentioned trust there very briefly. I've read one of your blog articles, and you use the phrase that trust is a performance multiplier. What does that mean?
If I trust myself to do the right thing, and I learn how to trust other people to do the right thing, very simply, that is a performance multiplier.
Okay.
Are you a chief executive or a senior leader within your organisation? If so, it would be great to have you join me on the podcast to share your journey, experiences and lightbulb moments along the way. Drop me an email at info@knowingselfknowingothers.co.uk if you'd be interested in having a conversation.
What kind of self-reflective exercises are you doing when you're with your clients and your teams, when you're doing programs? You talked about the circle with the dots. What else are you doing to help them build, especially people who are embarking on that journey? What are they doing to build their self-reflection?
So here's number one, notice. And it's about noticing. I'm very big on meditation and the awareness that comes through that. And when we are caught up in our thoughts, we have to start noticing them. Number one. So if you're caught up in a negative cycle, notice it. Ask yourself, is it true? Is it true that you're not capable? Is it true that you're stupid? Is it true that nobody loves you? Is it true that you're not worthy? You know, and if the answer comes back to you, no, or I'm unsure, then continue to examine it a little bit more. But noticing stuff, not putting a judgment on it either. But equally, you know, I want to blame other people and not take responsibility for my actions. Take a look at that too. You know, what happens when you take full responsibility for everything in your life, not just for the bits and pieces, but for everything. It was part of my choice. It was a decision I made. Here's the thing about failure. I'm a failure. No, you're not a failure. The events of your life may have failed, but here's what failure is simply put. It's an expectation, a choice, or a decision that did not go the way you had planned. And I want people to really hear that, because the biggest fear that I hear constantly from people is, I'm afraid of failure. I can't fail. Well, how many times have you failed in your life and survived? You know, how many times have you measured yourself against that failure because it was about you rather than the circumstances? And again, choice, decision, or an expectation that didn't go the way you had planned. So think about what that's all about for you. So again, the thinking piece becomes the first part of the self-awareness. Notice, where does your thinking go under certain circumstances? And ask yourself, is it true? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no.
That is hard stuff, isn't it? That is, you're opening cans of worms, you're going into very dark places, and you're having to admit things to yourself. And from your TED talk, you really had to dig deep to understand yourself, to be in a point where you could make those choices to do something different. I think that fear of going in and finding out those answers to who you are, what is the narrative of the self, that is tough stuff, isn't it?
It is tough stuff. But here's what I say, you know, who said life was going to be easy?
Indeed.
It's not easy even if you go the hard way and you continue to beat yourself up and your behaviors are not the healthiest. You know, is that easy? Hell no. You know, is this stuff hard? Yes, but what's the reward? And I'll tell you, my clients tell me they are absolutely gobsmacked at the changes that take place in their lives because they're willing to take the hard look and to be willing to say, I want to do this differently. And one of the stories I tell frequently is I have a client who said for 20 years she cried every day. 20 years of crying every day because she was a very unhappy woman. Her first marriage was a complete disaster. And the second marriage, she carried some of the behaviors into her second marriage with a much more loving and caring individual. But her insecurity and her fears still kept her trapped in that small place. And so she learned for herself that she could step out of that and become more. And now she's got more confidence. She makes decisions. She's leading her team more effectively. And she's discovered a freedom that she never knew she had. And that's the other side of that, freedom. I don't think about that stuff anymore. You know, people say to me, how did I get to be more confident? I go, well, it's inch by inch until one day you look back and you go, I don't think that way anymore. Or I don't do that anymore. Because you made conscious choices. And consciousness is what a lot of self-awareness is all about. I want to become a more conscious human being. And we should all strive for that.
Responding rather than reacting. Yes, definitely. You mentioned earlier your assessment tools, and something that we like to talk about is what are the tools and the techniques that people can use to develop their self-awareness. So tell us a little bit about the assessment tools that you use.
So I work with a company called Human Synergistics, and Human Synergistics has been around for 40 or 50 years at this point. But we look at 12 behavioral styles. We actually scientifically measure it. So people take an assessment. It's about 240 questions. So, and they're weighted. It's a psychological assessment. So they're weighted in different ways to get the results we're looking at. And it shows very clearly the percentage of these types of behaviors that are active in the individual. So for instance, I find a lot of people are very approval driven. They want validation because they don't feel it in themselves. So you're constantly looking to other people. Now, on a scale of 0 to 100, if I had somebody who was at an 80%, I would say you spend a great deal of your life not making decisions, not wanting to rock the boat, not wanting to upset people, and making sure that you're volunteering and being extremely generous with yourself. And then you get very resentful because it's not appreciated. So that's just one example of that. But these 360 assessments for me, because they're scientifically based, it's not just, the Myers-Briggs, what are you? You're a high ID, whatever the definitions are. And there's a ton of them out there. But this particular one I really love because it is scientific and because it really pinpoints the areas where people get caught up in their stuff. And when I can do that for an individual, they'll look at it and go, oh, wow, there it is. It's evidence. And you remember I said earlier, look for the evidence. This is one way of gathering evidence. And then from there, once people have that recognition, because this is true for self-awareness too, once you have the recognition, you can't go back. You can't just shut the door and pretend you didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Once you know, the next question is, so what do you want to do about it?
And if listeners and watchers do want to do something about it, before we came on air, Jacqueline mentioned that a lot of her training now is virtual. So that means it doesn't matter where you are around the globe, you could access Jacqueline's training. So if people do want to get in touch with you and they want to book onto one of your training courses, what is the best way to get in touch?
So the best way for me is Jacqueline at JacquelineWales.com. Very simple. The programs are all described on my website, JacquelineWales.com. And I generally work with teams, with groups of people rather than individually, but I will make exceptions for certain individuals. But that's primarily how I work, because I find that when you're working with teams and organizations and you can really uncover this stuff, and I've got 3 programs. One is Leading with Trust. The other one is From Chaos to Clarity, dealing with anxiety, stress, and fear. And the other one, of course, is the Transformational Strategies for Success. And we're currently building a 4th program on communication. So we run the gamut, and it's about how do I help organizations and especially mid-level managers really develop the skills and insights necessary to build a better workplace. It's very simple. There's too much toxicity and fear in the workplace. And my mission is to say, let's help individuals change their ways of thinking and doing so that we can actually build a better workplace.
Amazing. Jacqueline, it's been brilliant having you here. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been such an interesting conversation. And I actually got to see your TED Talk yesterday. So to be able to watch that yesterday and then to have a conversation with you today, it's brilliant. Listeners, watchers, you really, really do need to go and take a watch of that TEDx talk. It's so good. Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining me. It's really, really been interesting.
Thank you so much, Nia. It's been my pleasure. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode, where we aim to develop self-aware leaders around the globe to generate kinder, more respectful and creative working relationships through reflection, recognition and regulation. Head over to my website at knowingselfknowingothers.co.uk to sign up to my newsletter to keep up to date with my blog, podcast and book. Looking forward to having you on my learning journey.